the best benefit of having your own podcast. You can talk about your story. You can talk about your struggle. You can talk about what's working, what's not working, and then have a really good place to look back at. What a great place. So there's A, that. B, there is so much magic in creating and letting yourself be out there. There's so much value in getting clarity in what you want to do. I know one of the things both of you even mentioned earlier is we've gone through many business models, and that's any solopreneur's journey.
So the first easy one, just leads, generating leads from going out there on the show. People hear about you, they learn about you, they go to your website, maybe they download your ebook, book a discovery call. So that's a pretty simple one. That's pretty much why everyone wants to go out there. And then probably two more that I'd lump in there would be the networking play of just networking with podcast hosts.
Podcasting is such an impactful medium today, and for entrepreneurs and businesses, it's an incredible way to market your products and services.
But should you host your own podcast, or is it more effective to be a guest on other shows? Today, we host a matchup debating exactly this topic.
And representing the point of view that it's best to host your own show, our first contender launched her podcast in 2021 and soared into the global top 10 within the first year. She's leveraged her show into personal growth, different revenue streams, and a network of millions of followers. She's passionate about helping others start and grow their own podcasts and a big advocate for the platform's power. Please welcome into the Cashflow Fight Club arena the host of the Spicy Chai podcast, Mahrukh, the spicy queen of content coaching, Imtiaz. That's
Yes,
mouthful.
awesome.
And squaring off against her, our next combatant is a staunch believer in the power of making guest appearances on podcasts. He founded Podcasting U in 2017 out of demand for placing real estate professionals on high-ranking podcasts. He's since grown his business to serve hundreds of clients across more than 6,500 interviews and counting. He's passionate about real estate, investing, helping others, and, like me, being a girl dad, fighting out of New York. Please welcome to the Cashflow Fight Club arena, Trevor, the podcast guesting guru, Oldham.
Ooh, this is a great matchup and one that's packed with insights. Let's get right in it.
Let's do it. Mahrukh and Trevor, welcome to the Cashflow Fight Club podcast. We're looking forward to a fun matchup today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You bet.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Go ahead.
So as we're talking podcasts today, podcast guesting versus podcast hosting. And so I think this is going to be fun and insightful and a good way to tease out some of the pros and cons of both of these. But before we jump into the rounds and the meat of the podcast, why don't we get a little bit of background and how you got into the world of podcast coaching? Mahrukh, let's start with you.
Absolutely. So for me, it was around 4 years ago when I realized that my day-to-day, even though I had a very engaging, fast-paced work, and I worked for one of those big firms, it felt boring. Even though I had different projects happening and all that, I would go to work. I would have my typical lunch in the cafeteria area. This is pre-COVID, right, when we actually had that. I would take the commute home, listen to a podcast, watch something on Netflix, come home, scroll through dating apps at the time I was trying to find my partner. And then it was just rinse and repeat. And there was, even though a lot of people that would look at my life, they would be like, oh my gosh, she's so lucky what she's talking about. She works with one of the biggest firms. She gets to do exciting projects. She goes to downtown Toronto, all that 100% valid. There was something that just felt like, ooh, something's missing. I am bored. I'm not excited. I want to do something more with my life. That's when the whole content creation industry was really booming, right? TikTok was coming up. I know COVID really blew that up. YouTube, Shorts. And I felt for the first time, the gatekeeping in the content industry became lower and lower. And that's after COVID, right? Everyone just started recording. And that was, for me, a really big light. If everyone can do it, why can't I? And the podcast thing was like calling out to me for years. Like, I should do a podcast. I really want to do a podcast. People were like, you should do a podcast. You're so fun. And I was like, thank you. I am fun. But do I really want to do a podcast or not? And that's really how it started. I noticed everyone else was doing stuff during COVID. And I was like, you know what? I've always wanted to start a podcast. I'm going to start a podcast. And the reason I chose a podcast was because out of all the other platforms that were available for me, I love being behind a mic. I love talking. I love meeting new people. I know the content creation industry can also be very lonely. And I felt like this platform allows me not to do that. And the second thing, I think for the biggest thing is when I was going through some really shitty phases in my life, I would listen to podcasts. I listened to Brene Brown's podcast when I needed some courage and was going through so much shame. I listened to Nicole LePera when I realized that my family is fucked up and they fucked me up, right? I was constantly learning from all these other people through their podcasts. And I'm like, thank God they had the courage to put themselves out there. And I'm hoping that me putting myself out there and helping people will help others, help my impact. So that's really how I started podcasting. The podcast coaching came because apparently I was really good at it. So people started asking me questions and I was like, all right, let me help you for free. After about 10, 15 people, I was like, I don't want to do this for free anymore. And voila, there came a business model.
That's great. Beautiful story. I love that. I'm looking forward to dive more into the coaching side of things here as we get into the meat of the matchup, but great intro. And thanks for sharing that and enjoy your spicy chai there. Trevor, how about you?
Yeah, most certainly. So I've actually been in the podcasting space since 2015. So going on 9 years, almost coming up on 10 years, I guess, at the start of the year. And back in 2015, it was unpopular to go out there and start your own podcast, where today it's a lot more normal for you to start a podcast. But long story short, I was running a different company at the time. And I honestly just thought it'd be cool to go out there, start a podcast. And I was the one doing everything. So I was interviewing guests, I was doing the show notes, I was editing the episode, I was doing the social media clips. So did that for about 2 years. Fast forward to from those 2 years, and honestly just started freelancing the skills that I had learned. I was in college at the time, didn't want to go out and get like a minimum wage job. At the time, minimum wage where I was like $7 an hour. I'd rather go on Upwork and charge $50 an hour to edit a podcast. The money was just better. Fast forward a year from that, and I was doing everything I had learned through the Upwork platform, just freelancing my skills out of just editing people's shows, finding guests for podcast hosts. And then I started to come across people that wanted to go out there and be a guest on podcasts. And I'm like, I've never booked anyone as a guest on a podcast other than myself. And I've booked all these guests for all these different podcasts out there. And I just started doing that. And yeah, and honestly, it just grew exponentially. And within a year, we probably had 10 to 15 clients. And then I was like, okay, I got to bring on that first employee. And then it just kept growing. And then pretty much once the pandemic happened, the doors blew open and just so many people wanted to go out there and be a guest on podcasts. And it's funny because I never expected to be like a PR person. I have a business degree, but nothing in PR, never knew what it takes, never knew what it looks like. But enough people wanted to get booked on podcasts. It was the fourth company I've started. It was actually making money. I could actually make a livable wage off it. I was like, why not keep rolling with it? And it just continued to grow today. And really, since the company started, and I say 2017, but I don't even think we had a website until 2019, 2020. It was just all these freelance clients. And eventually I was like, maybe I should have a website. Maybe this could actually be a real company. And it's pretty much just taken off since then.
That's great. I love it. I love the fact that you both have just really organically grown and you found ways to add value. You did it for free, in your case, Mahrukh, and you charge a little bit, but just, yeah, let the business grow on its own and build and take you where the market wants you to go. So yeah, that's awesome. All right, a little bit of background. As we were talking before the show, we'll divide this up into 3 rounds. So round 1, we'll talk a little bit about what kind of reach and exposure you can get from being a guest versus being a host. Round 2, we'll get into the resources, so time and cost and anything else that comes into play. And then round 3, we can talk about the benefits and the results from each of these types of, let's just call them exposure. And then Legend and I'll take a few minutes. We'll confer. We'll pick a champion. You'll get your big gold title belt that you can wear every day when you go to the office, and on our wall of champions there. So this is going to be fun. Ding, ding. Let's get started here. And in round 1, like I said, let's talk a little bit about reach and exposure. Trevor, we can stay with you. So What do you see as the main advantages of being a guest on a podcast in terms of what kind of reach you can get or the exposure you can build in that fashion?
Yeah, most certainly. I find the biggest aspect of it is I'm coming onto your podcast today. You guys have been building the podcast up over the last year. I haven't done any of that legwork, and I get to come on and get exposure to your audience where after we hop off, say maybe an hour's worth of the call, then I'm done with it. That's it, where you guys have to continue to do the podcast and go out there and produce it. And I find that's the biggest exposure you get as a podcast guest is just by utilizing other people's audience out there that have taken the time to go out there. They've started the podcast, they've built that audience. And then typically, if I'm coming onto your show, there's a reason that you're having me. And then your audience is going to look to me as an expert just because you're interviewing me. And they assume that you're not going to bring in just anyone on the podcast because they've built that respect from you over the last year. And it can range. Some podcasts are going to be smaller. Maybe they have 50 listeners up to the podcast that have, if you're talking large, the Bigger Pockets podcast, you're talking
Right.
200,000. I would say like the Joe Rogan podcast might be out of the realm of possibility for the majority of
Come on,
people, but
man.
if we're just
Dream big.
saying within the real estate space, you have all those small to medium sized shows where anywhere from 50 listeners to maybe 1,000, where that's where I define the small and medium shows, where you just get to benefit from going on their audience. A lot of the times they'll take the episode, they'll create social media clips for you, so I don't even have to spend any money doing that. They just send it over to me. A lot of times they'll send me, I should be sending out to my email list, so I get to do that. So I find that's one of the biggest benefits of being the guest is I just get that exposure to the person's audience where I didn't take any time to build that audience. They took all that legwork on their own end to go out there and really build it up however long the podcast has been around.
It is powerful.
Mhm.
Yeah, we get some great leads guesting on podcasts and some exposure in that way. It's certainly a great way, as you mentioned, to find different audiences, resonate with people, test the waters even to see how you're going to do there. So yeah, good stuff. Mahrukh, let's talk starting and hosting your own podcast. So in terms of reach and exposure, how do you see the benefits from having your own show?
Absolutely. And I was actually taking notes when Trevor, you were speaking.
It's good stuff there. Yeah.
And what you're saying is spot on, right? You get exposure without doing any of the legwork. But a common theme I heard again and again is I go in and I'm part of someone else's podcast and they publish it to their audience. And that could also translate as you have no control whatsoever on what you speak about, what you want to speak about, who do you want to target. You're really on the mercy of A, the host wanting you on, right? And B, they want to talk about what they want to talk about. For example, on my podcast, I talk about podcasting, but I also talk about all these other cool things. I talk about my exposure to cricket or how I did my 9 to 5. All those things are very important to me. But if you put me in this one bucket of podcast coach and all I'm talking about as a guest, my life would be really boring. And that's why I started this in the beginning, to not be as boring for me. And that's the very important piece. So I want to preface it all to say, yeah, we're going to go into the reach and exposure part of it. But you have so much more control when you are a host. You get to control the pace. You get to control the content. You get to control what social media pieces are put out. Anyone can take your clips out of context, put it on social media if you're a guest. And the other piece also is if you are someone, and this is something that I will say as like in general, when I answer anything, I mean, if you're someone who thinks that they'll just have more fun just being a guest, do that. But it's something like it's calling out to you that you should have your own podcast. And the only reason like you're not doing it is because you think guesting will be a lot less work. That's where I'm coming in and saying, and those are the people I'm talking to, not the people who are like, I want to do guesting. That's more fun for me. I'm not trying to convince those. I'm just people who do want to do a podcast host and they think guesting is less work. You know what? If you look at it, maybe it is. But if you're a podcast host, people are more likely to invite you to a podcast because they know you're already good behind a mic. They know you own a mic. Whenever season 1, I was a lot more like inviting all over. Now that I'm launching into season 3, I'm only going after people who have their own podcast because I know they know how to speak. They know how to be behind a mic. I know they have their own podcast, which means we can do a podcast swap. which means we can collaborate. The amount of emails that I get for people wanting to be guests on my podcast, a lot of times I'm not even looking at them. So you're putting in that effort to go. I mean, there are people who are going to copy and paste a pitch and just hope that they get on a podcast. Sure, that might work. But anytime you have a bit more of an influence when it comes to email list or a LinkedIn following or just in general, you will have to pitch to that podcast host. And again, you're letting go of your control and you're hoping that they take you on and you're hoping you get to talk about what you want to talk about. Most of the times, that's not the case. They want a certain side of you. They don't want all of you in that. Those are I wanted to tackle all of stuff that Trevor said. In terms of reach and exposure, when it comes to just having your podcast, there's a technical aspect of it, right? You can do the SEO stuff on Google, making sure you're using all the keywords right, making sure you're creating those shorts. If you have guests on, sending them an email and saying, here's social media, please make sure you spread this across and blah, blah, blah. So there's all that piece. But I think where it's more important when it comes to reach and exposure is that your audience is learning more about your personality through this podcast. So think about it as a lead nurturing more than anything else. They are learning what it, for example, anyone hearing, they're like, oh, Mahruk's pretty cool. This is awesome. I can work with her. Or, oh my gosh, she's annoying. I cannot take that energy. But basically what it does is it brings the right kind of people, my people, to me. And people that are not for me, it repels them. That's what I love about being behind a mic and having the video on is I can show so much of more of myself by being myself versus just written content or just creating YouTube shorts about a certain piece. I can just talk about a whole topic. I'm talking to a friend. They get to see a part of me. They technically get to be coached by me. And then they get to see if I'm the right person for them and whether they want to be in my world or not. So I think that's an important piece that I wanted to mention too.
Mm-hmm. Those are great. I love all those. And as you were talking, I was pulling a little bit of those comparisons as well. The way Trevor approaches it and being a guest it can be very broad and it's almost like a gateway, right? Somebody gets to know you. They can decide whether they want to continue to explore. Oh, I wonder what's going on with Trevor. I can find out a little bit more. Oh, podcasting you, maybe whatever. You can go and explore. Whereas Mahrukh, in yours, there's really a depth of really getting to know someone through that single platform. And as you said, deciding whether to engage or change the channel.
Yeah, all those episodes too. Oh, okay, she still sounds cool. Maybe I want to check a few more episodes out. But as a guest, now do I go Google and put the name and see what other episodes they've guested on? It's just not super convenient either.
Yeah.
Again, nothing wrong with guesting. I think it's a great strategy, but all for people who are thinking of hosting, but then they're like, oh, maybe guesting is easier.
Sure.
So
It's a marketplace. It has to work. You have to have guests and hosts.
Let's get into round two and talk about the time and effort and resources that takes for you both to start and maintain this business. So, Trevor, do you mind starting on round two?
Yeah, most certainly. So I would say there's a couple of things that go into being a guest. And I always just want to make sure, just for the podcast hosts themselves, you got to have a good quality podcast microphone, just first and foremost off the bat. You don't want to just have AirPods in, just re-recording. I remember back in 2015, I was interviewing this gentleman. And he was at the drive-through of McDonald's. When I was trying to interview him. So you want to make sure at least you have a good quality podcast mic. For me, I typically recommend the Blue Yeti mic. I find that works best. For me, price fluctuates on Amazon, but let's say about $120, $100, depending on what time of year you buy it. If you're more budget friendly, I'd recommend a Blue Snowball mic. That's going to run you about $50. Obviously, you could buy way more expensive microphones, but if you're just looking more budget friendly, about $100 gets you a good quality podcast mic. And then for me personally, I like just using a high quality webcam, and that's going to be about $30 that I just buy on Amazon. And then you can go further. You can have different lighting setup. You can have a ring light. You can spend so much money on it. But for me, I didn't want to spend a ton of money on it. I didn't want to go out there and, for me right now, have a studio. I could go out and rent a studio. Then you're looking at $100, $200 an hour. Yeah. So the fees can really add up. But if we're just talking like for myself, $100 mic, $30 webcam, and I have a ring light for like when it's really gloomy outside, and I'll throw that up to make the
Right.
lighting a little bit better. And I think that was like 30, $40 on Amazon. So all in for like the equipment, about 150 bucks. And then when it comes to the timing aspect of it, there's really two ways that you could go about it. You could go and pitch yourself to go out there and be a guest on podcasts. So really what that involves is putting together a pitch for yourself. It involves researching shows. You'll probably want to put together like a one sheet, and you could get a nice professional one sheet. We have a designer on our team who's actually my sister that I like to, she's been with us for about a year doing it. I personally couldn't find a really good quality designer on Fiverr or Upwork, or maybe I would find one and then they would start to lapse. So I just kept it internally through our family to do that. So you want to have a nice quality one sheet. And she also graduated from like the top graphic design school in the country. So it made sense to have her help out. Honestly, it's almost like
Killing
a,
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's like a no brainer. So you want to make sure you got a pitch, you research shows, you have a good quality one sheet. If you're researching shows, there's primarily two platforms that you would use. One would be Listen Notes. That's going to be about 100, 150 bucks a month. Or you could use one called Raphonic. We use that. That's about 100, 150 bucks as well. I think I pay 300 bucks a month for that just because I have a large team that needs to handle it, and more team members, the higher the price. It's going to be typically difficult for you to search on iTunes because a lot of the times I find on iTunes, it's just going to give you shows that haven't had an episode in 2 years, and that can be very annoying.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to use one of those softwares. If you're looking for the cheaper route, I would use Listen Notes. You could go on and export different lists, and you pay, it's like a very minimal, you might pay 5 cents per podcast that you export. So 100 podcasts might be $5, give or take. Prices might have risen over the last little while, but doesn't have to be that expensive. And then adjust the time factor of you going out there. Are you the one sending pitches out for yourself, or you're going to hire a company like ours where you pay us a fee and we go out and we do all that work that I was describing for you? So you could either go one route. If you're going out there and doing it on your own, I would probably want to send 10 to 20 pitches probably per week. Probably 10 might be easier because you want to make sure they're not cookie cutter. They're personalized to the podcast host. They're specific to that podcast host themselves. And usually on average, probably takes about 5 to 6 minutes on a pitch on that end. So about 10 pitches, you're looking at probably about an hour a week. And obviously the more pitches you do, the longer it's going to take. And then the last little bit is showing up for the interviews itself. Typically, I just block an hour out for the interview. Usually, I don't know if I've ever had an interview go longer than an hour. I've had one gentleman, he did a 3-hour time block before, and we only talked for 30 minutes. That one was interesting. I expected a 3-hour interview.
Wow.
I don't know if you thought it was Joe Rogan or something, but yeah, usually I just block out an hour. And for me, and what I find works best for our client is usually about an interview to 2 interviews per week. So you could be looking at anywhere from
Mhm.
4 to 8 interviews per month. So just to make it simple, let's say each interview you block out an hour. You're looking at 4 to 8 hours per month on that end of going out there and being a guest on the podcast. And then if you include the pitching, if you're pitching yourself, add in another 4 hours. So it could be 8 to 12 hours per month of you going out there and researching shows, sending out pitches, actually showing up for the podcast interview. And that's, I think people sometimes think it's easy. And I know I want to win the argument here, but it definitely takes some time to go out there and be a podcast guest. You could download a list of shows and you could blanket pitch them out, but your conversion rate on that is going to be so small. You pitch 100 shows, you might get booked on 1 or 2, and they might just feel pity for you at the end of the day. Or maybe they're a daily show where they're just interviewing people every single day and they just need someone to interview in that particular day, but they're probably not the highest quality shows that are out there. So you just want to make that time to go out there to just do your research when you're reaching out to these shows. And again, like, you also don't want to be going on podcasts yourself that like don't make sense for you and your brand just by pitching any show, because
Yeah.
some shows will accept just anyone. And if you're like, and I've even done it myself I don't want to say by accident, but early on I would just go on a show and I'm like, I have no idea like why I'm on the show right now or why they accepted me. I wish they would have rejected me. But long story short, when it comes to the money aspect of it, probably about, let's just say $200 to make it easy
Mhm.
for you to start, and then about 8 to 12 hours a month worth of your time.
Okay. Makes sense.
And for your specific business model, do you have a big team working for you?
Yep. So I believe we have 8 people, including myself, or with myself. So there's 9 of us. So it's definitely grown. So we just call them public relations specialists. And then I have an executive assistant because it became hard to manage the whole team. So I needed someone to to help me out with that over time.
And for your specific service, like you offer a service to people, what are your prices? I understand you probably have tiers and things like that, but ballpark, like what somebody that wants to go out and hire somebody to go do all the legwork for them, what can they expect to pay?
Yeah, most certainly. So our like beginner package, it's 4 interviews per month booked for 1,400 a month. We do 6 interviews per month for, I believe that one's 1,800 a month. And then we have a 50 show package, which is like a little over 12,000. Then that's just not monthly, obviously, unless you want.
Yeah.
I feel like it'd be hard to book 50.
That'd
I think
be
it'd be hard
tricky.
for anyone to
Yeah.
get 50 interviews in a month, but that's usually spread out over the year. And what I like about it is we don't do any monthly contracts with our clients on that end, so they can just, if they want to do it for 3 months and then they want to pause. And we thought about locking people into 6, 12-month contracts, but at least for our business model, we find the average client with us about 2 years. Honestly, we just run out a good podcast at that point. We don't want to book them on a show that has like 10 episodes and is fairly new. But yeah, no, it's been good. I think early on I was charging people like $25 to get them booked on a podcast. It's grown quite a bit over time.
Yes.
Okay. So $1,500, $2,000 or something you can expect. All right. Let's shift gears.
Yes, Mahrukh, the floor is yours. Tell us a little bit about your time, costs, efforts that you put in your business.
Yeah, absolutely. And Trevor, I have an important question. Do you remember the McDonald's order?
No, I do not.
No?
I think I was just so appalled that I was like, I just want to get this off the interview.
Something I would always remember is
Yeah.
that he was on. It
Chicken
happened.
nuggets with sweet and sour sauce.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, one of so random, but one of my guests out of nowhere in the Middle East, my dad's knocking on my door. Can I pause? And I was like, sure. And then he goes in and he gets the door, and then he comes in with an ice cream. He's, oh, he really wanted me to give me an ice cream, and it's somehow I will always remember that. That's why I was like, this is really weird and different. And
Yeah.
this guy, this is not. This guy has 2 million on YouTube, like
Oh, wow.
50,000 Instagrams. He's like a very well-known person.
Yeah.
It was such a human moment. I loved that humanness. I actually kept it in the episode. So that reminded me of that.
That's great.
Anywho, getting to the cost, research, and effort. So, Trevor, both of us are wired so differently because it's so interesting because you literally went into like point, which is makes sense because our hosts are in the real estate world and they think like that. And the consultant and project manager and me think like that. But for me, I was like, ooh, when I thought costs, effort, and I was like, there's so many things that you can't put value to. That's where my philosophical mind went to. But I tried to keep it a balance of both. So I'll do a balance of both.
Yeah,
for you
sure.
guys. So first, I think spot on. It is one of the easiest way to have a good quality audio in your podcast is have a good mic. And I know Trevor mentioned the Blue Yeti. I actually hate the Blue Yeti. I have content on how much I hate the Blue Yeti. Nothing against you. Just I don't love it, but I recommend the Samsung Q2U. The whole bundle with the pop filter so you don't make that sound, or the shock mount to avoid the background. Hey, yeah. With everything included, it's less than $100, so you are saving a lot of money. And anytime you want to upgrade to a mixer, it does have that capability, which is what I like. Because when I did upgrade to a mixer, I was just able to get that wire, the connection wire, and I was able to Definitely, you need a good mic. Then you need a podcast hosting company. I use Buzzsprout. You can use others. I just started with Buzzsprout and I keep things simple and I kept it. That's, I think, $12 a month. And I highly recommend getting Descript for editing because they make editing so easy. And I believe that's $12 a month as well. Doing the math, and unless I remember something else, I would say around like $24 to $30 a month on your monthly subscriptions, and an upfront cost of $100, $150. Obviously, if you want to get a ring light, that could be $30 if you want to get an external camera. But honestly, even this recording I'm doing on my iPhone. The phone camera qualities are so great right now that you can use that video to record. You don't even have to spend on that external camera if you want to.
And you just have that connected in through your PC, or?
No, I just have it set up. So my audio will come through the mic, right? And that's being recorded, but my video is coming through my high quality iPhone.
And
High
then you
quality.
just download that
You know,
you just download that into the script and do it
that-
to match it up.
absolutely. I just upload it. I love the airdrop. You just send it to the Mac and then you're good to go. I think that's the best feature Apple has come up with, airdrop. So
Great.
that's
Yeah.
highly recommend that. So all let's just say is that the cost and can be as low as you want it to. There are people that would use a travel mic. That's a Rode, the one that I
Yeah.
recommend. I'm not getting the name right. That one's I think $110. You might just use that throughout. It's important to have good quality sound. What's more important is that you put your episodes out there. So if you don't have it, and if you just have your AirPod and you're just recording, that's okay as well.
Yeah.
The one thing that I did want to mention in the previous rounds, I'm cheating a little bit, but it's like one of those things is that the value, which is going to go into cost, value of documentation that your podcast gives you. You can't put a price on that, right? Alex Hormozy, when he started podcasting, for the first 4 years, nobody heard his podcast. But now that he's this big phenomena, guess what? He can go back into 2016 and be like, this was my first podcast, guys. This was my 10th podcast episode. Same thing. You all have been podcasting for a year now. Imagine if you're doing this for 10 years. You can actually in 10th year go back and see what were we talking to people about? What were our problems? The best benefit of having your own podcast. You can talk about your story. You can talk about your struggle. You can talk about what's working, what's not working, and then have a really good place to look back at. What a great place. So there's A, that. B, there is so much magic in creating and letting yourself be out there. There's so much value in getting clarity in what you want to do. I know one of the things both of you even mentioned earlier is we've gone through many business models, and that's any solopreneur's journey. We're trying to always figure out what's our message, or what's our impact, what words do we want to use, where do we want to go. There's no better way to getting better at that than being behind a mic and consistently talking. And that's how I've gotten clarity in my message, in my purpose. My season 1, things that I was talking about, and I kept talking about some things, and I was like, okay, now I know how this works. Now I can say this in a different way because I've said it like 5 different times. The practice I got because I had my own podcast, that's invaluable. Being able to show up now confidently and tell stories, I got that skill through my podcasting. That skill is invaluable. So yes, there's effort put in for sure. So breaking it down like our friend Trevor did, right? So when I prepare an episode, I will put in about 60 minutes to prepare. So I have a template now where it's like the objectives of the episode, guest intro. And actually when I sent them the Calendly link, I asked them for their intro. So I actually input that into my research. So I have the template all set up. That will take me anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. Then the recording itself, around an hour-ish. And then now I have a team to edit for me. But when I used to do the editing myself, my episodes were about an hour long. And when I used to do the editing myself, that would take me anywhere from 90 minutes to 2 hours. Yeah. A lot of people will be like, oh yeah, I'll get it done in 30 minutes. It doesn't happen. Especially not in the beginning. You get better at it especially with Descript, thank God. I love that stuff. It's very easy now, but it's still like for me, I love listening back and being like, ooh, this is really cool, or let's stop this, or let's do more of this. So for me, that the creation of magic takes time. Yeah, it's about 3 hours a week. So that's 3 or 4 hours a week. Let's even put more because I'd rather do more time.
Sure.
That's 16 hours, but you're getting 4 solid episodes where you're talking about what you want. All of that is turned into shorts, reels, tweets, blogs, newsletters. And the biggest thing of it all is that you're improving your skill. You're getting clarity on your message. You are building your pieces of work. You're an artist, you're building your piece of work. And on top of that, your audience gets to spend time with you, and you are building your fan base as well. That would how I would look at it.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, so I'm going to close that and say you're both teasing into round 3. So let's just go ahead and transition into round 3 and talk about what kind of results being a guest versus hosting you can expect and take away and what the benefits are in both. But you each touched on the fact that, and we've both found this as well, that you sharpened your skill in terms of messaging. Trevor, in your case, you were focused in real estate and things like that. If you're guesting on people's podcasts, you obviously, it's like your elevator pitch, right? You just get to rehearse it over and over again, and trial and error. You go, oh, I really bombed on that one and I want to sharpen this up. And so I think that just both in hosting and guesting, you get this repetition behind the mic and in front of the camera, and you can become a little bit more comfortable and hone your message down to hopefully you're doing that. But I would say most people probably just naturally, just through repetition, will be able to hone that. But Trevor, how about on your side? So as a podcast guest, what are the benefits that come with guesting on other people's podcasts? And we can talk about things like, pure money in terms of being able to monetize things or exposure, marketing, things like that.
Yeah, most certainly. So the first and easy one, just leads, generating leads from going out there on the show. People hear about you, they learn about you, they go to your website, maybe they download your ebook, book a discovery call. So that's a pretty simple one. That's pretty much why everyone wants to go out there and be a
You
guest on
guys, just sorry to interrupt, but just in a little side note, but in your company and when you rep people, do you work with them on this? Is that something that you guys work with, or are you purely just placing them on platforms and getting them exposure?
Yeah, no, we definitely want to make sure that they have some sort of marketing funnel set up. You can go as deep as, do they have retargeting campaigns set up on their website for when people come to them from their
Sure.
podcast? Do they have email automation funnels? Things that you should be having if you're a real estate investing, because the majority of our clients are raising capital. So you want to
Mhm.
make sure if you have that first discovery call, a lot of the time someone's not ready to hand you a check for 50K. It's going to be a months long relationship. Maybe it's going to be a year long relationship. So at the first and foremost, you got to make sure you have a website, and then either somewhere on your website where someone can book a call with you, or they have some sort of lead magnet set up. And to give you like some insight for our lead magnet that we set up, and I use Google Analytics, and I can see these are the top 10 traffic articles on our website. I took those 10 articles. I hired someone on Upwork for, I think I paid her $250. I said, hey, put together a nice looking ebook. And she just took the content from those articles. She probably used like Canva or something. I'm obviously not a designer, so that's why I hired her. And she made it look very nice and professional. And then nowadays, we probably get 20 to 30 downloads a month from that ebook from our website. And then that goes into our email automation funnel where we have a drip campaign. And the majority of those people are hearing me for my podcast. So you could spend so much time going out there and building out your funnel. But at the very least, you got to make sure your website looks presentable, because people will go to your website, and if they don't like how it looks, they're just going to they're gonna leave. All of us do that. So you at least want to make sure you have a good quality website out there. Sometimes people don't even have a contact form on their website. I'm like, what do you? It's just like a standalone page. I'm like, you got to have something like that set up. So we'll check through that. And then if you get even more into it, some people want to set up specific landing pages for every single podcast interview that they do. We were doing that as a company, but then it just became too much of a headache trying to get into the person's back end of their system, and I don't want to like mess anything up if I hired someone to do it, because I was the one that was doing it. And
Sure.
sometimes hiring like a lot of the websites are on WordPress, hiring like a WordPress person to go in there. Sometimes these freelancers you got out there, they're good. Sometimes they're very sketchy and they're not good. And I knew how to do it myself, but I didn't want to bring someone to help out with a client and then them not do a good job, and then it falls back on me. So we pause doing that. But yeah, no,
Okay.
we do help them out with that lead process. Part of it, we want to make sure everything is so. I love marketing, so that's why I can geek out on. There's so many marketing tools that you can use out there.
Sure.
But yeah, that first and foremost, the biggest one is just everyone wants to generate leads. Occasionally, you might get someone out there that just wants to go on podcasts to go on podcasts, but usually, if you're paying our company $1,500, $2,000 a month, you want to make sure you're getting something
Yeah.
out of it. You want to make sure your money's being spent wisely. So that's first and foremost. Outside of that, a lot of our clients just build that brand awareness from being guests
Yeah.
on podcasts where they're very successful at what they do, but not that many people know about them. So they build that brand awareness. And by going out there on these shows, a lot of the clients will have a media section on their website, and they'll just put all the podcasts that they've been on. So if they have a potential investor that wants to invest with them, but wants to learn more about them than just reading their bio on their website, they can go through and listen to their podcast episode. So I find I like that aspect of it. And then probably two more that I'd lump in there would be the networking play of just networking with podcast hosts. I know as me, as a guest on podcasts, I've talked to hosts and they've referred clients to me. I've invested in their deals where we're just have that nice connection where it's a 30-minute hour conversation of us just one-on-one as a podcast guest. So I find there's that networking aspect of it where it's a little bit tricky if you go to a RIA and you're in a room with 30, 40, 50 people and everyone just has their business cards and they're passing it around and it's like a speed dating. You talk to everyone for 60 seconds. It's, did I really get to actually know this person? So it's a little bit harder to network. And I find real estate more than any industry I've worked with loves to network. Everyone's always looking to help each other out. No one's looking to one up each other. You get the people that are egotistical and probably want to do that. But for the 99% of people in the real estate space, I find that they're very kind. They're always willing to help other people out. And that just comes to that networking play. And then the last aspect of it would probably be the SEO aspect of it, where a lot of the times you go on a podcast and that podcast is going to link back to your website and a recap of the show, usually called your show notes. And long story short, a lot of the podcasts that you go on, if they have a good quality website, they're going to have a good, what you consider what's called a domain authority score. So let's say the domain authority is 20 and above. That site links back to your site. Long story short, it's going to make you look good. Google likes when you look good. You're going to rank higher on Google. The higher you rank on Google, the more people are going to see your website. Not to say every website, every interview you go on, the website's going to have a high DA score, but it is nice when you can go on one every now and then and you get an 80 DA score and it just really pumps up the SEO for your website, and then you start to rank higher on some of your other keywords. So there's that aspect of it. It's definitely more marketing aspect of it. I don't think too many people think about that. Maybe once a year I'll have someone come to me and be like, I only want to go on podcasts where their website has a DA score 20 and above. And sometimes
Wow.
it's crazy. Sometimes these podcasts will have 50 listeners. I'm like, it's a decent show, but we could definitely do better. Nope, I don't care. The website has good quality score. Let's go for it. So there's that aspect of it that not too many people I think about when they're going out there and being a guest on podcasts.
Yeah, I definitely wasn't expecting it to pop up in this matchup, but you're bringing in the heavy guns there. I like it. So geeking out a little bit in the SEO world. So good stuff. All right. Thanks, Trevor. Mahrukh, let's shift over to hosting a podcast and what kind of benefits we can expect.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything you said about SEO, Trevor, is spot on. And that applies to when you're hosting a podcast as well. It's important to look into all of those things. So there's one thing of when you're hosting a podcast, you're running the podcast, right? The other piece is also making sure you're promoting the podcast, you're marketing the podcast, you're making sure you're attracting your listeners to it. The SEO piece, that happens with each podcast episode as well, for at least for me and for my clients. It's okay, yeah, this is how you make sure there's a meta description. This is how you make sure your blog is using all the keywords. Is the first sentence of your podcast description even helpful? All of those things definitely have to be looked at. And one of the best ways actually to promote your podcast is podcast guesting. Because guess what? When people are already listening to a podcast, you can send them to whatever lead magnet you can. But the easiest thing, they're already on the podcast platform. The first thing they're going to do is look at your podcast if you have attracted them. So it's the best way to really go. And it's like previously, a lot of bloggers used to do that. I think they still do. You would like co-blog.
Guest
It's
blog
the
or
same
something.
exactly. So it's the same concept. Guest podcasting is a great way to expose yourself to other people and other hosts and building your network that way. So there's definitely that piece of it. And the other thing, only thing I will mention that I will add to Trevor's thing, that's something I recommend when I teach the marketing piece of your own podcast, is when you are going to another person's podcast, right? A lot of times that the end piece, which is tell us where you can find the show, right? You can do, oh yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn or you can go on my website. But if that particular show is, and that podcast and that audience, even if it's 50 people, if those are very important to you, feel free to create a specific page for that show. Like, for example, it'd be like, oh yeah, you could go to mahrukhimitaz.com/cashflow. And then you've created a page just for these listeners. And then they can go into that page and it's more likely that they're willing to convert. So those specifics are always very important. And the reason I'm mentioning all of that is going back into the results of having your own podcast. Is the biggest pro of having your own podcast is that it is yours. You talk about what you want to talk about. You make it what you want to make. You show up as yourself. And I think that the biggest mistake most hosts make, they want to be like, what will get us more listeners? What do we have to do to attract more people? And to that, I say, be more yourself. Talk more about you. Nobody in the world has your experiences, your voice, your skills, what's happened in your life. Like, for example, with you guys, like a quick solo episode of like you versus her, right? Like having a quick point punch out on decisions you talked about, business models you've made, decisions you've made, how your kids are in your 20s. Okay, tell me more about you. Let me learn more about you. That's what attracts me to you versus someone else that's doing exactly what you're doing. It's the human connection, which you can make really good use of when you have your own podcast. I have like episodes where I'm like struggles that I'm going through right now, struggles that I was going through a year earlier. So it's like one of those things where I'm using the platform to share more of my story and to connect with people that I want to connect with that can be like, oh yeah, I love it. She's talking about this. She's talking about the stuff that I'm going through. And that's how people are going to come to you because you're going to be relatable. So use that to share more of your story, more of who you are. And again, in terms of results, for me, my podcast, it helped me promote my own stuff. It helped me promote my course, my group coaching program, my one-on-one. I use it as a way for people to get coached by me for free. It's really that. It's like versus going into discovery calls or doing webinars, all of that. Anytime I get into any problems or anything, I will create a podcast episode on it. So even in the future, what's pings me or I ping them and they're like, oh yeah, I want to do a podcast, but I don't know. I don't know if I have enough time. I have an episode created on it. Oh, that's cool. You know what? Maybe you can hear this episode.
Yeah.
They might connect and work. They might not. It's what people can start thinking through. How do I use this podcast? Like as Trevor talked about lead magnet, your podcast is a lead magnet. Episodes are, each episode, is a lead magnet. If you are being specific enough and willing to solve people's problem through it, right? Like literally be like, hey, actually making this up completely, not very familiar with the real estate world. The capital investments versus buying a house. Oh, are you stuck with this? We have 5 episodes, episode blah, 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 exactly on that. But for you, we recommend episode XYZ. Let us know what you think.
Yeah.
That's a lead magnet. And you're giving someone so much value when you haven't done anything extra really for yourself. So just some things to think about in terms of when it comes to results, money, leads. How do you use what you're already doing and maximize it for what you want?
Awesome. Good stuff. All right. You guys really brought the heat today. I love it. Toe to toe, every round. Legend are going to take a quick minute here to confer, and we'll come back with our champion announcement. So hang on with us 1 second. You feel free to continue fighting.
I was fighting. I thought it was like very healthy competition.
They usually are very gentlemanly contests here. Thank you both. Before I make an announcement, I will say for anybody that is trying to decide, should I guest or host? You've both said it. Do both. Put your voice out there, but also get on podcasts. They're out there. There are so many out there today and so many ways to get your voice heard. So you really can't go wrong. But if you have to choose, and based on this matchup that we've gone through on the 3 rounds and talking about the different exposure you can get, how much it costs to get started and the time and effort and all those kind of things, we're going to give the nod to Mahrukh, and hosting your own show, I think is a great way to really get your voice out there. But that being said, it is work. Trevor mentioned that being a guest should be work. You don't just show up and talk. There's those kind of people. So you also should be investing in your lead magnet, your messaging, your finding the right shows and things like that. But I do think hosting is a great way to develop your brand and really build a community of listeners and your tribe. So congratulations, Mahrukh, but congratulations to both of you because you both have great purpose.
My belt right here.
It's
the world podcast. And I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, it's like right here.
Right.
I watched a lot of WWE growing up, so I'm really into the wrestling.
Nice. All right. I was a fan as well when I was a kid, but hey, thank you both for coming on the show.
Yes.
We do like to end with some gratitude, all of our shows. So we certainly thank you both for coming, sharing, spending your time, giving some insights to the audience. But Trevor, for you, is there a person or maybe a couple people that really have been instrumental along your journey that you'd like to give some credit to?
Yeah, most certainly in not so much personally where I've ever known him, but just following his philosophy
Yeah.
and how it operates and just Steve Jobs. Just been fascinated with him, just reading his books, just obviously his movie, watching his Stanford graduation speech quite a bit. And just yeah, just seeing how he challenged the status quo. He didn't let things just be as they are. Maybe his personality was a little brash at times, but overall I liked how he was thinking. I think the world would be definitely be a lot different than it is today. Just look what he did at Apple with the iPod
Yeah.
and the iPhone, and Apple really hasn't done that much since he's been gone. I think it's been 10 years now. So he was one that I always just looked up to, just try to learn as much as I could and practice him and try to be a little bit nicer to my employees than I think he was. But just the way he thought about things, that's what I try to implement in my own life.
All right. That's a unique one. What a great credit there. I like that a
Mhm.
lot. So that's great. Mahrukh?
Hello. Thank you for having me on. I had a lot of fun.
Good.
And thanks, Trevor, also for being such a great sport. And for me, there are two people. I mean, there's a million people, literally. I think I could have done without. But if I were to choose two, one would be Simone Seol. Her podcast is called I Am Your Korean Mom. I
Hmm.
love it. She has, I found her on Instagram, heard her podcast, and she has taught me how to bring more of myself to the podcast and to the podcasting world. And that is invaluable. 100% her. And now the second person is Sarim Asadi, and he's very on LinkedIn. And he is someone, when I was starting out, he helped me see that this is what I should be actually doing as a business. I was good at it. I didn't know that I should be doing it, but he's like, Mark, this is your space. That was super helpful too.
Love all of those. Great. And Mark, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you? Should they want to reach out and hear a little bit more?
100%. If you have been convinced today by listening to the weirdo me that you want to start a podcast and don't know where to start and think it's too much work, I have a free podcast training video for you. It's only 14 minutes. It has 4 steps to starting a podcast without even needing me. So you could go to the website, mahrukimtiaz.com, and click on start here. Or you know what? It will actually pop up. My designers are super great. And you will get access to that video. And I'm excited to hear what you think about it.
Awesome. We'll get that in the show notes as well so people can click through. And that's great. Trevor, how about you?
Yeah, most certainly. So they can go check out our website, Podcasting You. Within the website, they can get access to our ebook. That'll walk you all the benefits about podcast guesting, gives you a bunch of nice statistics on the demographic of folks that listen to podcasts, especially good for the real estate audience that are always looking for those high income earners. And if they are curious about being a guest on podcasts, they can just book a discovery call directly from there with our team. Or if they do want to get directly in contact with me, just connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always having conversations there. I love talking to people. I love just making connections in that space as there. And I'm pretty active there as well. So I'd say either our website or just going directly through LinkedIn. Happy to start a conversation there.
Okay, great. We'll get that also in the show notes. And that's podcastingyou.com, podcasting you.
Correct.
Awesome. Thanks again to you both. This was a lot of fun. Podcasts are great. We love them. I could have spoken for another hour about other topics that I want to get around to. Maybe in a future episode, we'll look at that. But thanks again. All the best to you both. And we'll check you next time on the Cashflow Fight Club podcast.